Well, thanks everybody for being here. I know it's getting late in the day. We're really excited to talk to you a little bit about how you harness diversity to solve a people problem. And a lot of the conversation is, this is about just us kind of engaging and talking about some of the situations that we've been in our collective careers. I'll introduce myself first, and then we'll have the panel introduce themselves, and I have some questions for them, and it's super interactive. If you have questions too, as we're kind of going through this, don't hesitate to ask, but we'll definitely reserve some time at the end. So my name is Jenny Brinkley. I've been with AWS Security a little over 3 years now. I actually joined the organization through an acquisition. I co-founded a cybersecurity startup called Macy. We shipped a product, or Harvest, and we shipped a product called Macy. And for the past year and a half, I've been able to work in an organization really focused on kind of what are we doing next? And Inforce was one of those ideas that we came up with from our team, and so we got it produced, and here we go, off to the races. So a little bit about me. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, I'm Avni Rambhia. I'm the product manager for Cloud HSM. It's a service inside AWS cryptography. We're divided across Virginia and Seattle. We're an intrinsically diverse team, and I'm so excited to be here and share our stories.
Hi there, Fiona Williams from Deloitte. I've been with Deloitte for about 35 years. So I say either I don't know any better or I really love it at Deloitte, and I think it's the latter. And I'm responsible for our AWS global practice. So I had many different roles at Deloitte over those years, as you can imagine. And this is really fun in terms of the cloud.
Hi, I'm Patricia Smith. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Cox Automotive. Has anybody here heard of Cox Automotive? Don't feel obligated to raise your hand. So Cox Automotive is a technology company that's in the automotive space based out of Atlanta, Georgia. You've probably heard, it's about 24 different companies that make up Cox Automotive. Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book, Dealertrack, Manheim Auctions. So a lot of those, you've heard of those companies. So I run security and risk for Cox Automotive. I've been there for about 3.5 years now. I was one of the companies that they acquired. So I worked for Dealertrack. I'm based out of New York. And I was one of the founding members of Dealertrack 19 years ago.
Very cool. That's awesome.
So I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Teri Radichel, and I have a company in Seattle next to Amazon. It's called Second Sight Lab, and I do pen testing, assessments, cloud security training. I've been really focused on cloud security for about the past 6 years. I have about 25 years of experience and a whole bunch of certifications. And I'm also an AWS hero. I see another one in the crowd, so thanks for coming.
I love it. I saw your tweets today during keynote. Thank you. So I kind of want to just dig into it and talk a little bit. First of all, why are you in security? And I'm going to answer that question too, but I kind of want to hear from you. Whoever wants to start. Who feels up for it?
I'll start.
Go ahead.
So why am I in security?
Yeah, what made you get into the space?
Okay, so it's an interesting story, and I'll try not to take up too much time on this one. So how I got into security is actually interesting. I was working for Dealertrack at the time. I was actually doing managing their creative services department and building internet applications for them. But I always sort of had a passion for, believe it or not, looking at log files, which is kind of weird, and figuring out, where there were errors happening on the application, and then working with the developers to say, okay, I was able to actually replicate that, and kind of work with them to try to get things fixed. So back in 2002, I was working for the CIO, and he came to me and he said, I know you're always looking at the logs. We see some abnormal behavior happening on the Dealertrack application. And just so that everybody knows what Dealertrack does, Dealertrack has 1,500 financial institutions on one side and 22,000 auto dealers on the other. So the auto dealers submit credit applications and pull credit reports through the Dealertrack application. So we have a lot of very sensitive information.
Just a little.
So he asked me to look at the log files because he said they saw some abnormal traffic happening. And when I started looking at it and I started seeing that the same IP address was coming in from multiple dealerships across the United States. So again, I'll try to make this a short story. They put me in touch. We did our own investigation. They asked me to build a honeypot, which I had never done before. I never even knew what a honeypot was at the time, and started redirecting the traffic that was coming in from that IP address to the honeypot to just try to figure out what is this bad actor trying to do. They then put me in touch with an FBI agent in Manhattan, and we did the investigation. They wound up tracking it down as to who this person was. Essentially, what this person had done was they built a website that had looked like DealerTrack, right? They reserved a domain name very similar to DealerTrack. And again, this is back in 2002 when this was all kind of new. And auto dealers were going to that fake website, entering in their credentials, and this person was stealing them and using them to get into DealerTrack. So once they arrested this guy and he went away to jail and he had to pay restitution to the company, my boss at the time asked me to start a security program at DealerTrack. So that was I was the one and only security person starting the program. And that was how I got into the field, and I love it. I'm so glad not glad that happened, but I'm glad that the result of what happened, it was very good for my career.
That's awesome. Fiona?
Sure. So I got into, sort of accidentally. I was always interested in computers, and I always, thank my dad, not only on Father's Day, but every day, that he took me, kind of under his wing. He was into computers as well as an engineer. Used to take me to his office on the weekends and let me, play with the computers, do my math homework and things like that. And I really, developed a love for it. And I think that, that's somewhat atypical. Most men, particularly in that generation, would have taken their sons to work and not daughters. I know we all have now, take our daughters to work programs, but that was early days. And so I always was interested in computers and mixed that with, risk management and things like that. And, 20 years ago, started the security practice at Deloitte and led that, and, have always looked at sort of what's happening at my clients, what are the challenges, and then how do we help them manage that risk. For the last 3 years, I was the first CISO that Deloitte had in the US. And so that was fun and very interesting and nice to get that operational experience. And now I've transitioned that over to a team that I hired, and not as involved in that day to day. But I just love security, and so thankful that I got involved in it early days.
Because you've been at Deloitte for how many years now?
35 or plus, something like that. Long time.
A lot of questions about that, but Avni.
So I think, like most people, I fell into security. I used to write video compression software for a living. And for those of you who remember the early DRM days, I was right in the middle of it. And so I was trying to write an interoperable multimedia player. It turns out if you can't decrypt from individual copyright owners, you can't build an interoperable player. So off I went to MPEG to try to write the interoperability standard. And from there, I ended up with Microsoft's DRM team. From there, I ended up with a startup that was doing software anti-tamper in all its diverse applications. Realized I was a better product manager and better influencer than I was a developer. That was a hard, I'm a good developer, but I'm a great product manager. But it took a little while to make that transition. I think that was also the time I realized that security is a field of influence. You have to know the technology, but you have to know the people, and you have to know their priorities. And having everybody who wants to do the right thing actually move in the same direction is as much about technology as it is about influence. And I just decided I loved it. So from there, I, through various other places, ended up at Amazon here in the crypto division, and that's how I got here.
Awesome. Teri, how about you?
Like everyone else, I fell into security by accident, and I actually wrote something about it because, like everyone else, it's kind of a long story. So if you follow me on Twitter, it's just my name. I have 2 stories out there, how I got into tech and how I got into security. But one of the main things that got me into security was I had a breach, right? And I was trying to tell my hosting company that I had a breach. It was a big hosting company that you've all heard of. And they were like, no, it's fine. So I had to go through the motions to prove it, and I have the whole story out there. And it made me mad because I was my own business owner, and it was my money. It wasn't some big company's money. And I had no idea who to contact or how to get help. So I want to help other people now. So I write things, I teach classes, because I want to help other people not be in that scenario. Mm-hmm. And I also really think there's a bigger picture of why security is really important in the world right now. There's a lot of things that can be impacted by security. So that's what really drove me in that direction.
Yeah. Very similar stories to me, too. Totally fell into security. I was actually working on digital media interactives for big brands, and had a friend who had a pretty significant data loss at her company where a lot of her designs were stolen by some folks. And she called me and said it would be amazing if there was a technology that could actually understand how data is moving within an org. And I had another friend at that time, my co-founder, Alex Watson, who was building some tech that was actually more focused on watching individuals, which I thought was a real creep factor. I was like, well, what if we flip the script and you actually watch the data move within the organization? And I kid you not, a week later, we had a meeting with the customer, and it was like 2 kids in a backpack out on a picnic bench writing out, like, who do we know with money that can fund us? And that is seriously how this company got started. I'm not joking. It was. I look back sometimes, I'm like, I can't even believe it. And then I think about these opportunities that I've been able to have, and especially in the security space, because it's really like the foundational components of what needs to get built and considered to do what we do at the kind of scale. So I kind of want to take a change in direction and talk a little bit about what the theme is for today's talk. And again, it's really about diverse thought. And when you have people with very similar backgrounds, with very similar situations, how do you really kind of think about diverse thought? Like what kind of creates people to bring different backgrounds together to get that kind of outcome that you're looking for? And Avni, I want to start with you because I know at AWS, in terms of how we think about building, we go down that path because you bring people together with have like the craziest backgrounds of people that you meet.
I'm into that, right? So I think I'll answer that in 2 ways. AWS cryptography is sort of known as one of the beacons of diversity within AWS. It's a top-down mandate. Our leadership, our individual managers are all fairly focused on diversity. We don't really put that into the hiring process as much because we're still hiring the best candidates for the job. But where I see the emphasis is on the influx, right? So when we have resumes coming in, when we're recruiting, when we're doing university outreach, when we're doing events, we make it a point to go to destinations that are as diverse in their audience as possible. So we're looking for geographic diversity, we're looking for discipline diversity, we're looking for diverse demographics, diverse cities. We're also looking for diverse disciplines. And I say this often, security is a strange space, right? When you're a mechanical engineer, you've typically studied mechanical engineering. When you're an industrial engineer, you've typically studied industrial engineering. You ask a security professional where your degree's from, you'll hear physics, music, architecture, art, graphics. I mean, I was a medical instrumentation developer before I fell into digital media, before I fell into security. You have to find that diversity of input if you're going to have the diverse team that sits at the table. And especially with security, that diversity is so important because you're not just thinking about building the most secure product or infrastructure on day one, right? You're thinking about something that's going to stay secure on day 2 and day 3. You want to think about what's my incident response going to be? What is my detection going to be? What's my mitigation going to be? How will I go back and redo these things? How will I influence people to put the right priorities on the roadmap when everything's about shipping the features and delighting the customer? How do you make sure that security is still job zero? How do you push the culture that encryption is not slowing you down? It's like brakes on a car. If you want to go fast, you need the brakes. They're not slowing you down. They're there to keep you alive. And that diversity is important. Once you understand that it's important, it sort of filters. Mm-hmm. It filters into everything. The other thing I will say is, as a product manager, I have the privilege of talking to multiple customers and sitting at the table with leadership teams and everyday operations teams. And we see better outcomes when the teams that we're talking to are diverse, right? So there's gender diversity, there's role diversity, there's age diversity, there's background diversity. And the more people you bring in to the table when you're planning and when you're strategizing, the better your short-term and long-term outcomes are. We can usually tell as soon as we walk into a room whether this is going to be an easy process for the customer or a fairly difficult process for the customer. And that's really the message I wanted to come here to say is make your teams diverse. It will result in better outcomes for you. I mean, at least from a security perspective, but also more broadly.
Fiona, I'd be curious, especially with the 30 plus years at Deloitte, like how do you get people to think that way?
Yeah, I think our journey started about 25 years ago, when our current CEO started. In those days there were very few women in professional services and at the accounting firms as we were then. And he started, a program from the top down, men and women as colleagues, and it was extensive training and behavioral things. And then, that has expanded to more diversity and things like that. But we have, a definite, and I'm a firm believer, if you don't measure something, it's not going to happen, right? And so we, are very structured in the way that we measure all of these things in terms of recruiting, retention, compensation, et cetera, so that we can make sure that there's no, sort of unplanned biases or anything, because I think that can happen if you don't measure it closely. Without realizing it, people sometimes, might have just an unconscious, insensitivity to things. So we've done that, and I think it's been, tremendous. We ended up having the first woman chairman of our board, and then we had a woman CEO, which was a first for the firms like ours. And so I think that early investment that we made helped to attract and retain a lot more women and minorities. And put us in a position where we could have leaders that are women, and that sets another tone at the top, right? And it really encourages from the recruiting all the way up, and the programs that they rolled out to help with retention have really made a big difference. So that's how we've done it.
That's great.
Yeah, so I think it's, and now I'm thinking about this a little bit differently now based on the answers that I've heard,
Yeah.
but I think a lot about how everybody knows how technology jobs have changed over the last 20 years and within the last 5 years, how things have happened where it's changing so quickly, right? And then I look at the security field and the security profession and I go, wow, being in it since 2002, how the profession itself has changed dramatically, right? And where I'm going with this from a diversity standpoint is, I think about, depending upon what industry you were in, right, say 15, 20 years ago, security professionals were either very technical, had a military background, or maybe had a policy background, right? If you were in a real regulated industry, it was all about the security policies and the standards. And I think over the last few years, probably the last 5 years or maybe even a little more, it's turned into more of an influence role. Right? And I look for this when I'm hiring security professionals that, you have to be a really good influencer, and that generally that comes down to people that have emotional intelligence, right? You can have, and security people should have technical intelligence, and they should have emotional intelligence, because you have to be able to understand people, you have to be able to form good relationships with people, because that's the only way you're going to actually be able to influence people to do what you need them to do, right? And I just think about that, and I said this at one of my, I work for the CIO at Cox Automotive, and he had a town hall, and I basically said, I have a team of 50 people in a company of 30,000 people. There's no way that 50 people are going to secure this organization. It's going to take each and every one of the employees to be able to do that, right? But again, women generally, and again, there are men too. I mean, I don't want to be biased myself here, but women generally have very strong emotional intelligence and have very good influential skills. So I think it's important that you balance your team with the folks that do have strong technical ability, but that also you have to have the folks on your team that can properly influence teams to do the right thing from a security standpoint.
And then how do you think about the calibration? Because I think that's where a lot of folks struggle. Because when you say diversity, it's like, we're going to diversify the team. And so they feel like that there's a mandate in terms of a percentage. But I think that that's always the rub. It's like, how do you find that right balance, if that makes sense?
I think, it all depends. Again, I lead the security and risk team.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to the leader has to really be able to appreciate, right, that you're going to be more successful if you have a wide range of people with different cultures, different backgrounds. They bring different things to the table. It's just going to help you to be more successful just overall. If you have all of one type of person within your organization, you're going to rub people the wrong way. You're not going to be able to advance, and you're not going to be able to really get the program where it needs to be.
Yeah.
So I think the leader has to be the one that really, from the top of the organization, has to acknowledge that you're going to get more bang for the buck, and you're going to be able to make sure that you have a good, good influence across the organization if you have a wide range of different types of people within your team.
And then Teri, I know from a scientific research piece, I'd be kind of curious with like bias you've experienced, and I'm kind of curious as to kind of how you've drawn on some of the work that you've done in your org, because it's you, and working with your customers. Yeah, like how do you kind of battle it and tackle it and not get frustrated? I'm just kind of curious from your perspective there.
So yeah, I work by myself now, but I've definitely worked in larger organizations, and it's hard to know when someone has been biased against you because you're a woman, or just biased in general, or they just disagree with you. But I've definitely felt times where, it seemed like the guys were treated differently than the women. And there are research studies out there to show that. For example, I think actually Warner Vogels might have posted this the first time I saw it. It was a study that was done on GitHub. And when they saw that the woman was checking in the code, it would get rejected more than the men. But when they didn't know it was a woman, it would get accepted more than the men. So it's hard to quantify or to know when someone's biased, and I think a lot of times people don't know themselves when they're biased. And the other article that I read, or research that I read, was that, and it's something I've always done just naturally, because I don't know about you guys, but you feel like you have to prove yourself like 10 times over. So I've always had, when I say something, I have research to back it up. When I talk to people about what I do, I say I have credentials, I have a GSE, if you guys know what that is, like one of the highest certs in cybersecurity. So it's having those credentials, and when you present those to a group of men about a woman, they tend to then accept her as qualified. That's just some of the research that I read that was kind of interesting.
So we're also kind of at this interesting stage where I feel the conversation around diversity and inclusion is becoming a louder drumbeat, but trying to give things that are practical for people to take on and do. And I'm just as guilty of it. A couple years ago, we did a reInvent event that I produced with this guy in the front row, and it was a nightmare. I didn't work with our D&I team. I did this rogue program, and they were like, "What are you doing?" And it was terrible. It was beautiful, but it was a terrible program. So I guess, how do you get, it really was, how do you really think about getting more people involved and not feeling like, I'm gonna own the diversity banner for the company? Like, how do you get people to really kind of collectively work together? And I know I didn't put this question out to y'all, so I know you probably want a little time to think about it, but this has been a personal challenge for me, and I know that our D&I team has been like, what are you doing? So I'm curious.
So I think in our org, I see it in a couple of different ways. And, in previous orgs, I have seen that tedium set in, where if the goal is we must have X% women or X% minority or X% fill in the blank, it starts to feel unauthentic to the team. And so instead, what I've seen be very effective here at Amazon and some of the other places I've been in is an emphasis from the top down on the values that we are chasing, right? So when you're explicitly not talking about the characteristics of the individual who's being interviewed at that point in time, but when you're focusing on the input pipeline, right, for the liaison, as I mentioned before, for the resumes, make sure that your input pipeline is diverse. And then once you have the people on board, as you mentioned, making sure they have the best mentoring they can have, the best training they can have. I think what I've seen in our org especially is the managers are very aware of each individual's strengths and weaknesses. So I will continually sell myself short, 20 years in the industry, and I will still do that. And my manager will call me on it in a perfectly unbiased way, but he will start to fill those gaps and say, look, stop doing this, it's going to hold you back. I've seen other managers in our org who will create space at the table for individuals to speak up and be heard. And when other people at the table see that space being created, they will step back, they will amplify. And when you give that level of respect and that space to each individual, now each of us has room to blossom and grow where we've been planted. And it's really that trajectory that I've seen makes the most difference in the long term. So to your point, again, as you groom these people, each to the strengths that they individually need, now you're going to build the foundation for a diverse organization as you move forward. I've also seen our management, for new parents of either gender, carve out time and say your family comes first. The freedom to be authentic is not a gender-specific or a race-specific need. It is a need for everyone. And when you create, again, those safe spaces that trust in your individual people, you tend to foster diversity, and you tend to attract candidates into your org. The referrals go up, the retention rates go up, the effort that people put into the team goes up, the authenticity goes up, and then it's a virtuous cycle. I think that's what I've seen work most. So again, not tracking just to numbers for the sake of tracking to numbers, but really making a deep commitment to building the type of team that will help your company succeed, and then investing in each of those individuals the way they need to be invested in so that each of them can blossom to their full potential. That's what I've seen work.
Let's go next. I'm curious.
Okay, I'll go. I would say that I'm not a big fan of diversity by the numbers. Like, I always feel that you need to hire the right person for the job, right? But I think as a leader, you need to recognize the things like you were saying, that, you hire the right person that has the skills for the job, but you have to be open to all different types, men, women, all races. And you also have to understand that when you do hire women, right, a lot of times if they are a mother and a wife, they're going to have where there's going to be some, they may need to come in a little bit later. And I would say this is probably the same for men nowadays too.
Yeah, I'm seeing it
right?
change.
I'm seeing that change too, where you just have to be aware that there's going to be different needs for different types of people, and you have to be open and understand that and kind of allow that. And because I never was the one, I don't like when people talk about, well, you need to have this percentage of minorities within your group. I don't think that's the right way to approach it personally. I think you just really need to get the right people for the job, but you need to be very, you have to really keep that whole unconscious bias in check, right? And be aware of it so that you're giving everybody an opportunity. You're giving everybody a chance for that position. And the other thing that I've seen too, and again, the differences with men and women that I've just seen over the years, when women that I've kind of mentored or that I've been friends with who look at a job description, they may want to apply for a job, right? They'll always point out the qualifications that they don't have. Well, I don't have this and I don't have that. Whereas a lot of times you'll see men, they never think about that. They think about all the qualifications that they do have. So that's another thing to be aware of, that you may have women within your organization that may not even apply for a job within your group or within another group because they don't think that they are qualified. And I think it's up to all of us to help encourage them to say, you've got the qualifications. Don't undersell yourself. Do it. Like, you've got to really push folks who you see that are struggling internally with, I don't know whether or not I'm technical enough, and you've got to help them. You've really got to help. I feel like our jobs just in life itself is to try to help people that may be struggling. And that's an area where I've tried to do that with women that a lot of times they just don't feel that they've got what it takes. And you've got to just give them that little push to say, you've got it. You've got nothing to be concerned about. Do it.
Totally. And I think it's also about staying true to your authentic self, because I loved what you were talking about, and I love how in terms of like hiring the right person. But it's also creating that space where someone feels like they can be that person, they can have that opportunity. And that's something that we really focus on, especially in the security org, is creating those spaces for people. And I talk about this with the team all the time, but being able to dare greatly. It's like, I want you to be able to bleed into spaces that you never thought you'd be able to go to, like push yourself, like know that you're gonna fail. You're probably gonna epically fail. And if you do, it's okay. But we've got each other's backs and we're gonna support each other. And I think for us, like when we think about the teams and the structure, and diversifying our thinking, it's really encouraging that and making people feel, and again, it's like that safe space. Fiona, I was curious for your perspective.
Yeah,
here.
I mean, I think it's so important to make sure that you have a mentor, right, and that they help you. Because I think that, individuals might have the right intention, but you can get lost in in the whole grand scheme of things. And so I always encourage folks to get a good mentor. And it doesn't need to be the same, gender or diversity. It just needs to be somebody who's going to take an interest in your career. and they will help to push you, because otherwise I find a lot of times people they aren't aggressive enough with their careers. And I think you mentioned as well, like, having other people push you. and that's, I was very fortunate throughout my career. It wasn't really that I, really strove to achieve things as much as having great mentors, men who helped me, took me under their wing, positioned me for things that made my career more successful than it would have been. So that's what I always encourage everybody: is find a good mentor, make sure you build your network, broad network, both within your organization, outside, of people who you can learn from, get experience from, and leverage that to help you to grow.
And I just wanted to add one more thing about mentors, since you brought it up. I think also that don't think that even just people at work can be mentors, or that people in in your profession can be your mentor. Mm-hmm. My husband is my mentor, in one sense. I remember a couple of years back, because he knows me so well, he gave me one of those little signs, those little wooden signs that have kind of the corny quotes on them and stuff. But it said, they told me I couldn't, and that's why I did. Right? And I think it's it gives me chills even just thinking about it, because it's true. You've got to encourage people to don't think you can't do it. Mm-hmm. And if you think that way, or if somebody is making you feel that way, you prove them wrong. Mm-hmm. You show them that you can do it. Again, I think it's just so important to encourage people to be positive and push forward.
Mm-hmm. And those are words for all humans, not just some of us.
I just had something to add to that. I definitely had a mentor. I had no concept that people did software programming for a living, and I remember there was a woman at a place where I landed by accident, and she was a programmer, and I thought she was so cool. So I asked her, how did you get into it? Another thing that you mentioned about Reinvent and so on, and jobs in general, right? There's a pipeline, but some people, like you all said, aren't applying. So reach out beyond that pipeline. And when you're looking for speakers at conferences or whatever, reach out beyond that pipeline to get that more diverse audience, because sometimes people just don't apply, or they don't think to apply. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're just as good, but they just it never crossed their mind.
Yeah. Avni, I'd be curious, how do you create safe spaces for people in diverse backgrounds to apply for crypto?
So I will confess, I actually don't.
Oh.
The safe spaces are created for me.
Off the stage.
No, I think it's a little bit of everything, right? So coming into a room, the problem you're trying to solve. I think most of us, if we think deeply about it, know already as we come into the room what different people's opinions are. Mm-hmm. What I've seen happen, and I was kidding, I do this too. You're listening for the dissonant voice, mm-hmm. right? And when it's soft and it's not amplified, you stop the discussion and you amplify it, right? All of us, as we spend time in our teams, have a bank of trust. I call it my brownie point balance. And you can draw on that because when you walk into a room, after a certain amount of time, you are trusted to know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it's incumbent on all of us to use that bank balance to stop a discussion when it needs to be stopped and pull out the voice that needs to be heard. Mm-hmm. And it's not always someone who is weaker than you or younger than you. Sometimes it is, in fact, someone who's more senior in the room, but just doesn't feel like that particular battle needs that amount of energy. Mm-hmm. If you feel like it does, then stop the room and say, guys, hang on a second, I heard something, I think we need to hear it again, and simply have that person repeat it, right? And just the act of saying, guys, listen, we need to hear this, and having that statement repeated will make sure that it's considered. It's really just as simple as that. There's no magic to it, but when everyone does it consistently, it creates a culture of support. And then you don't have one person, typically me, monopolizing the entire table and talking a mile a minute, because some of us will do that. And you also make sure that when people come in, they have thought deeply about the position they want to represent. So another thing our VP does is he will, in fact, make everyone around the table periodically state an opinion. And so you can't hide in the noise of others. You you do have to state what your position is. And it serves two purposes. For one, you hear everyone's opinion, but for two, every individual knows that they're responsible, that they have a place at the table because they bring a point of view, and that you need to be prepared to present it, and it helps everybody.
Yeah. Fiona, I want to talk a little bit about how you bring diversity at Deloitte in terms of just the conversation and the practice. You've been there for a while. Obviously, people trust you. So how do you make people care?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we have a lot of programs, and I think people learn, how to be effective leaders, to be inclusive and things like that. But I think the types of people that join Deloitte are normally, fairly sort of aggressive. They want to be successful. They're not likely to be sitting at the table not saying anything. It's probably the other way around. And so, obviously, as we grow, we have many more diverse types of personalities at the table. But in general, most people, get the training. They have their mentors. They have people that are helping them to be successful. And so, it's a lot easier to encourage that kind of behavior. And to encourage them to really push themselves to be successful.
I always like it when I talk to people that have been at companies for a good chunk of time, because you've seen it all. So I want to kind of fast forward for a minute and talk about what the next kind of 5 years could look like in this space, and some of the things that you're doing within your organizations today, but also what do you think are some takeaways, because I always like to give people some takeaways to kind of think about what they could be taking to their own companies. Where do you think we're going to be?
So I think from a security standpoint,
right? Yes, security lens, please.
I think we're going to be at a point where we're focusing less on tools and focusing less on the startup phase of projects, and starting to get better and better about thinking about the ops side of things, right? So I do foresee a sort of balance between the upfront compliance security, thou shalt do things this way because they have always been done this way, and the reality of day-to-day ops, where it's fine to encrypt on day one, but you need to rotate the keys and manage the keys. It's fine to, know where your data was on day one, but then how do you, track your assets through the life cycle? It's fine to build something that works for mainframes in year one, and then how do you adapt to mobile devices and whatever the future brings us? I foresee, therefore, that processes will become more geared towards how is this going to work in the long term? And I think we're going to start to see, again, more diverse groups of people come together, not just in the ops phase, but also when the standards themselves are being developed, when the certification protocols themselves are being developed, when the compliance docs are being written, when the best practices are being developed, when the use cases are being written, when the consulting practices are setting up templates for other companies to use. I really think that's where the industry is going, where we have all these tools and all these methods and all these goals now. It's just sort of going to become, how are we going to run this on a day-to-day basis over time?
Fiona?
Yeah, I would just say that there's been so much focus around STEM and really helping young women, while they're in middle school and high school, to get interested in technology, which I think has been, part of the problem, not just for security, but everything related to technology, where women have been underrepresented, and minorities as well, because a lot of them don't even think about those things because their parents don't do it, or they don't get that encouragement at home. And so I think that's going to help. It's not going to be in 5 years. It's going to take longer, but it's definitely making a difference in terms of the focus around STEM. And encouraging more women and minorities to get into the technology field, and that will help then to drive more folks into security. And security has become much more prevalent and sort of sexy than it used to be. And so I think that I've seen a lot more women getting into it. So I don't think it's going to be fixed in 5 years, but certainly a big improvement.
That's awesome.
I think one of the big changes, like mentioned, I grew up at a time, yes, I'm that old, there was no home computer, and my dad started selling them. There were no cybersecurity programs. I got a master in software engineering, and the word security I don't ever recall being as part of that master's program. I think now that you're seeing a lot more programs in schools, a lot more people talking about security, that's one thing. So I think women may have more of an opportunity to consider that as a career path. I think, like we said, we all kind of fell into it. I think that's changing. People are actively seeking that career. And the other thing I really see as a big change is security used to be this kind of secret knowledge. You had these group of people, and I'd tell you, but I have to kill you kind of thing, And it was always some kind of secret. And I got into it, and I was like, why is this a secret? I want to tell everybody. I want to tell developers. That's why I speak at reInvent, and that's really why I got into DevOps. And I saw it as a future because in my business, I was like, wouldn't it be great if someone automated all this stuff so I don't have to do it? And that's kind of what Amazon did. So I really see a convergence between, and as everyone probably knows, the security people, developers, and every developer is going to need to know security and really know it going forward.
And on that note, I would say, because I agree with everything that everybody just said about, bring your daughter to work day and like getting kids into STEM and getting young girls into STEM. But I think over the next 5 years, as we see kind of the shift of security getting embedded into all of the technology jobs, it opens up our job pool of people, right? Because I'm already seeing it at Cox Automotive. Like we've got one of our number one priorities is to embed security, kind of a security transformation, right? Which I hate using those words, but to embed security into everybody's job. And then what's going to wind up happening is you're going to wind up finding people within other technology groups, whether it's software engineering, whether it's infrastructure engineering, you're going to find people that really get interested in it, right? And it's almost going to organically happen where I see it today. We've got some of the head of our engineering departments doing webinars on how to secure AWS workloads.
Yes.
And I go, okay, that's awesome. Can I steal them? Like, can I get them to come work for me? But you know what? It's better off that they're within their organization now influencing the other teams. I just think it's going to organically happen as companies start to understand that your security team is not the ones that can secure the company. It's everybody else that has to do it, and then you're going to start to see people that start to fall into security, right? Like we did.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm going to open it up to some questions if folks have any. Yay!
I'm curious. So I actually got to sit next to Patty at lunch. I'll try to project. And we were saying that we were looking forward to a Reinforce in the future where there were more women and where organizations were sending more women to attend this conference. What do you think we should be doing to encourage more women to attend conferences like Reinforce that are focused on security?
Good question.
Oh, repeat the question. The question was, how do we encourage more women and a lot of minorities to attend security conferences and like Reinforce? And I'll talk for a hot minute about this because I'm very passionate about this space. I think a lot of it is the inclusiveness of how we build programs, build content, build learning opportunities, make them available to the point of people feeling that they could go to the 300s, the 400 type sessions. How do we get them that information? And I think a lot of it too is just up to other folks, either through social mechanisms or other ways through other mentors, to get people to feel comfortable and confident to go. Because I think there is that self-sabotage that happens of, I don't belong there. Like I belong in the 1s to 200s, not necessarily the 3s to 4s. That's my point of view. Curious about everyone else's.
I think, part of it is Grace Hopper is a huge initiative at Amazon and other places. The We Power Tech team, there are interest groups where you can find the diverse audiences that you're looking for. And just having evangelists who are plugged into each of those communities makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I was thinking similar. I was thinking, AWS, Amazon is such a large company to partner with these different organizations that are women in technology type of organizations, right? And to try to really target them to come to these types of conferences.
Yeah, I think there's, the advertising you can do, but also having women speakers and things like that. So, as you're selecting who's going to be presenting, try to make sure that it's diverse and representative so that, their followers will want to come to the conference and things like that. So I think all those sorts of things help.
Yeah.
I definitely don't have an answer to this, but I was wondering about it. And I was also thinking about things in my past where what if there are women asking you to go to the conference, but the people at the company are like, no, this guy who's in charge of the team needs to go. Is that happening? I don't know if that's happening, I know that my first year at reInvent, I paid my own way, but that was mostly because Capital One told me that they would never use AWS. So I said, I'm going to go anyway.
And all in.
Yeah, and they did,
128
obviously.
kb should be enough for anyone.
But I just wonder that. I wonder how many women asked to come and they were told,
Yeah.
no, this person over here is going to go. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. We're super open to different ideas about what to do, whether it be through sponsorship, whether it be through different ideas of just encouragement. I think that that's like the biggest thing, that people just are, one, afraid to ask, don't know who to ask, and then don't know if they're going to be supported to go. And then the expectations of once they're at the event, feeling comfortable enough to go to those sessions. So what do you do on that entire journey? And that's the stuff that we really need to focus on, especially we have a D&I team at Amazon, and I need to partner more closely with them. We all do. And to get their perspective, because I'd love, personally for me, I would love to see this a really diverse place. Like, Grace Hopper's awesome, but like I would love to walk the halls and not just see my face. Like even as like a white woman at these events, like I would love to see a diversification across the board where people feel comfortable and empowered and heard and represented on stage. I think that's the other part too for us, that we are really, I want to have the right people talking about the right things. And I don't want it to just be like, hey, let's talk about the diversity of who's going to be there. It's like, I don't want it to be a thing. It's like, we hired the right people. We got the right folks there. Like what you're doing in crypto, like those kinds of things. And to your point, Patty, too, about how you're hiring to hire. It's like, I want to see that kind of just bleed into all areas of the business, so.
And I know even at Cox Automotive, like we've started, like every other company is starting a security champions program, right? Like I was talking about before. But what we do is on a monthly basis, we highlight people that are outside of our team that have done something to improve security, et cetera. And then we do a big quarterly security superstar recognition for them. And I think just for myself to kind of go through and, okay, who won the monthly awards, who won the quarterly awards, and maybe the security team should fund them to come to these types of security conferences.
Yeah.
Again, it's important that you try to work within our own companies as well. I mean, Amazon can't do it alone.
No,
gotta
we can't.
all be
Partners make our world go round.
Yes, yep. But it was interesting, and I'm sorry, like walking out of the keynote this morning.
I know.
I was in a sea of men. I was very aware of it. And then once I got out, I go, well, the one good thing is there's no line in the ladies' room. There was a line wrapped around in the men's room, and there was no line for the ladies' room. I go, well, that's the one thing.
But I
Grace
did like.
Hopper and EWF are the two places where I have to stand in line for the restroom. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. But it was nice to see a young lady at the keynote. So I did notice that, and she did a great job.
Yeah,
So
Abby's fantastic.
nice if in future there were more of them at the keynote.
I'm on it. People want to speak at events too. Please reach out to us. We would love it. Any more questions? Oh, wow. Okay, let's do this. Who wants to go first? How about you? Yeah. I'm going to Donahue this. I'm going to walk down. I am that old to know who Phil Donahue is. But he, like, ran. I don't know if I can run in my dress. Yeah, no, here you go.
So I'm going to try to not be too long-winded, but this didn't pop into my head until you said something about like coming off as fake, and that really struck a chord. So this kind of has two parts. My fiance did her master's degree in studying how oppressed individuals apply to colleges, and she said one of the things that came out in that is that people of color will end up like going to a college that was marketed to them with a bunch of marketing material with like, you know, people of color in it, women in it, and they're just like, you know, white men everywhere. And then the other day at work, we've got an intern who we were talking about, it was a conversation sort of like this, just about diversity, inclusion, what do you do better? And she said, I can't remember, I don't know if you were there, anyway, she said, just the fact that you're having this conversation exploded my brain. Like, she was like, that makes me want to work here so much more, the fact that you're even talking about it. So how do you reconcile those two like thought processes during the hiring process and present yourself to these candidates in a non-fake way? Because that's got to be so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the authenticity.
Yeah.
I think, I'll take it first and I'd be curious. You know, sometimes it's funny. I get phone calls sometimes where I'm like, we're bringing in a female candidate, can you join the loop? We don't want to make her feel uncomfortable. It happens all the time. And one of the big things I've been really trying to push on with the business is, let's not just think about, let's bring a lady face to the meeting or to the loop to make them feel more comfortable. It's like, how do we really just dynamically change it. And I think a lot of it is just talking about it. I think
That can easily go south, right? Like that can feel fake for the candidate.
totally. They're just like, oh, you're my lady, or you're my diverse person here. Yeah. So I don't have the answers, but I think talking about it is important. So that's why we're here. You want to take it?
No, I agree. Just having the discussions, making people more aware of it so that when people do recruit and things like that, they are discussing all the opportunities and how diverse we are and the programs that we have around it. But without that encouragement, people forget, you sort of take it for granted. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that everybody understands how much most organizations are doing to try to really help with it. And so I think if they knew and it was communicated, it would be more helpful for them.
I think, what I've seen as a woman at interviews, right, is it's very easy to tell who's being authentic and who's being, a token nod to diversity. I think, my best interviews have actually been with men on the team, as much as I've enjoyed the interaction with the other women as well. As an individual who's joining a team, you want to resonate with as many people on it as possible. So it's just, when diversity is part of the culture, it will come through and you don't have to try to say the right things or do the right things. I will also say, my husband's a professor, we mentor students, and I think it's important to tell every individual that they are worthy and that they deserve a place that respects them. And so as a candidate, when you're in high school, as you go through college, when you're interviewing, if you walk through the door knowing that you are good at what you do and that you deserve to be respected, you will automatically not settle for anything less. And then you've got survival of the fittest, the most diverse, the most inclusive companies will get the best people, and then market forces can do what they do. That's my perspective.
Yeah, that's okay. Any other questions? I know we're getting to time. Oh, all right, I love it. Phil Donahueing. Really got it. Thanks, I really got this. There you go. We could probably afford a couple mics around here, but.
Hi, Paddle, thanks. Tom George from Capital One. So, Tara, I'd love to talk with you afterwards about your perception of us. Yeah, it's been a long journey over the last 4 years or so. My question for you is, at our company, we've been going through a significant D&I investment within the company. I've been part of a program called Men as Allies, and it's been one of the programs I've been really proud of in my 20-year career there, about having the ability to really kind of work. Initially, it was with the Women in Technology group, but other diverse groups, about how do we mentor and give back in terms of growing the populace and diversity in the organization. I'm just curious if you have any experience or anything you can relate to in terms of mentorship and other programs within your experiences in your careers. You're seeing it happen more and more, and whether or not you have anything to kind of take advantage of that.
I'm actually going to give big kudos to Capital One right now, because when I was there's a great internship program. I started out in Seattle, so I was in a line of business that got acquired, so it was a little different. But when I moved to the cloud team, I was working with some of these interns, and there was women. There was a woman on the security team that was intern. There was a woman, can't remember, she did something else related to the cloud team, and I just think that's great. I think that's the way to go, to keep finding those women and bringing them in. That was really great. And Capital One was also the longest place I ever worked, 5 years. I made it 5 years. So Capital One is great.
And scene.
Well, I know I'm so thrilled to be part of Cox Automotive, because they have a wonderful training program. They have a big diversity and inclusion team. They've got the unconscious bias training that folks have to, that all different levels within the organization have to go to. They partner with different organizations like Year Up. I don't know if I'm allowed to give shout outs to different organizations,
sure.
but
no, I love it. Go.
Where we bring in interns that are from, underprivileged areas, maybe high schoolers that didn't have the money to go to college. You bring them in, they work for 6 months, and then you try to find them a job. They've got a lot of wonderful initiatives that are going on just to make sure that we're aware and bringing in different types of folks from different backgrounds, and it's wonderful. But we do that at Cox Automotive, and it's great.
Awesome. Any other questions? Yeah, oh, here we go.
Hi, you work for big companies and minorities are properly, I don't know, someone helps them, but what happens to those people that are outside as independent contractors or, I don't know, you Teri, I don't know you personally, but I know I'm tracking your social life, and I just want to see what do you suggest? How do we protect these people who are outside of these big companies? And also another question is, do you think social media helps? Because I really think that it helps. Because I think when I think about security, pen testing stuff, like I think about Teri, which is crazy. I mean, it's great.
That's awesome.
And also Abby, and there's a lot of women that really do great job for that. But sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's heavy. I don't know. How do you feel that?
So I think you're asking how do you hire outside contractors who are women? How do you find them? Oh, how do you protect those?
Yeah, like how do you give them confidence, like as an outside contractor, not in a big company that has resources and folks for them?
I mean, it's hard because some people there are still perceptions. I've been in scenarios, like I feel actually that Capital One is very good at, there was a few things that happened, but mostly I think they really support women, and I didn't have a ton of problems, especially on the cloud team. Met some great people there. When it comes to a small business, I'm not trying to grow a big company. I'm just a contractor. I come in and do some pen testing assessments. I have a class that I teach. And so I figure like the people who like me will hire me. I don't need everyone in the world. I'm going to focus on the people who value what I have to offer. I worked really hard to get where I am. And I do leverage social media a lot. And I know some other people do. I think it's helpful. I actually think social media is awesome for security, because it's your real-time threat monitor. Like I woke up in the morning when I was doing security research for WatchGuard Technologies, and I saw WannaCry, and I was immediately going, okay, do we stop this? Do we block, you find out these things. So from a security perspective, it's great, but it's also a place to share knowledge, a space to show what you can do, and I definitely post blog posts to try to help people in addition to, I get paid for what I do. So from all those angles, I really like social media. It's a chance to connect with people that before it existed, you would probably never connect with.
I just can't wait to follow her on social media now. She sounds like she's got a lot of good things that she has to say. So
I
that's
love it.
great.
Awesome. We have time maybe for one more question, if it's real quick. Okay, yeah. And pass the mic. Sure. Thanks. Yeah, it's all good.
So this question's more about cracking the mold a little bit. So I've noticed in some of the teams I've been with in the past that they get stuck in sort of a feedback loop of where they're at. So like a great example was, taking the personality test. You talk about emotional intelligence. I've been on a team where we took that and I was the only one that came out with emotional intelligence out of like 40 people or something, right? So it's almost like they kept hiring the same people that they like, that just like them, reinforcing that. And the same thing happened with diversity, where it became sort of like a boys club kind of thing. Like we had interns, they would refer to it like that. And breaking that, like the minimum numbers and percentages, I agree, is very disingenuous and it doesn't sell. But what is do you have any suggestions about breaking that mold when there's people are stuck in a loop or a chain like that?
I mean,
Yeah.
that's why I feel like you have to measure it, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't identify that necessarily, and it's not going to change. And until you measure it and force change, and then as those people that are brought in because of the forced measurement get into positions where they can influence and drive things, then that changes the overall culture. But it's right, exactly. So you need to have the visibility up front, and then I think that the natural process occurs when you have more of a mixed team that's doing the hiring and things like that.
But again, I was just going to say, like in large companies, you usually have that. You have where they are measuring these types of things, but when you're in smaller companies, a lot of times they don't do that type of measurement for diversity and inclusion, right? So again, I'm very blessed to be working for Cox Automotive. They do those types of tests, the personality tests, and they actually did like HBDI, and they had everybody post their results in their cubicle and in their office. And it was very interesting because you could start to see, like what you were saying, you have a manager or you have a director, and everybody that works for them, they all seem to be within the same, spectrum. And it's an awareness thing. And that's where, it raises the awareness, and you go, there may be a problem where that person, that leader, may need to go for some additional training so that they're aware that they need to broaden the types of people that they're hiring.
With that, we are out of time. I'm sorry, Avni.
No, that's okay.
We're like right at time. I didn't think we were going to take the whole time. Thanks everybody for being here. I know this was kind of a different session of how we kind of talked about what we were going to do, but we are going to do more of this. We want to talk about it. We want to make it more visible, and we're also open to a lot of feedback. We want to work on this as a community together. So enjoy Reinforce. I hope I see faces in Houston. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for being here, and thanks to the panelists. Yeah, appreciate it.